The desert wind howled through the skeletal frame of the old Joshua trees, carrying the faint tang of sagebrush and engine oil that clung to everything in Blackridge. Caleb Turner wiped the grease from his hands on a rag that had seen better days, the fluorescent hum of his workshop light buzzing like a persistent mosquito. At 44, he moved with the deliberate slowness of a man who'd long ago traded urgency for solitude. His broad shoulders hunched over the half-disassembled Harley on the workbench, tattoos of faded eagles and crossed wrenches snaking up his forearms like forgotten maps. The workshop was his fortress, walls lined with rusted tools, the air thick with the metallic bite of welding sparks and the low rumble of a distant freight train echoing off the sun-baked hills. A sharp knock rattled the heavy steel door, 3 quick raps, hesitant but insistent. Caleb paused, his calloused fingers tightening around a wrench. No one came out here unannounced. The nearest town was 20 miles of cracked asphalt away, and folks knew better than to bother the lone biker who kept to himself. He set the tool down with a clink and crossed the concrete floor, the soles of his boots scraping softly. Peering through the peephole, he saw a small figure huddled on the porch. A boy, no more than 10, clutching something to his chest, his face pale under the porch light's harsh glow. Caleb unlatched the door, pulling it open with a creak that cut through the night. The boy looked up, eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears, his skinny frame swallowed by an oversized hoodie that smelled faintly of rain-damp earth. In his hands he held a crumpled photograph, edges worn as if carried for years. You're Caleb Turner, right?" The boy's voice cracked barely above a whisper. He thrust the photo forward like an offering. "You saved my sister years ago. I had to find you." Caleb's breath caught, the words hitting him like a sudden skid on black ice. He took the photo gingerly, the paper cool against his skin. It was him, younger, wilder-eyed, in his paramedic uniform, kneeling beside a stretcher in the chaos of an ER bay. Beside him, a teenage girl with hollow cheeks and tangled hair, an IV line snaking into her arm. Rachel. The name flickered back from the depths of memory, sharp as shattered glass. The boy, Noah, he introduced himself with a trembling nod, shifted on his feet, the porch light casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. "Her name's Rachel Jenkins. She was in bad shape, overdose. Everyone said she wouldn't make it, but you didn't give up. You stayed with her all night, even after your shift." Caleb's throat tightened. He hadn't thought of that night in years. Not really. He'd buried it deep, under layers of chrome and solitude, like a bad weld he couldn't fix. But now, standing there with the wind tugging at the open door, it all rushed back. The sterile sting of antiseptic, the frantic beeps of monitors, the way Rachel's pulse had fluttered under his gloved hands like a trapped bird. It had been a storm-lashed evening in the heart of Blackridge's underbelly, the kind where thunder cracked like judgment and rain hammered the ambulance roof as Caleb and his partner raced through flooded streets. Dispatch had crackled over the radio. Female 14 unresponsive. Possible OD at the Old Mill district. They'd found her in a derelict warehouse, sprawled amid broken bottles and flickering shadows from a dying bonfire. Her friends, scattered like leaves, had bolted at the sight of lights, leaving her alone, breaths shallow and ragged. Caleb had dropped to his knees in the muck, the cold water seeping through his pants, checking her vitals with steady hands honed from a decade on the job. "Hang on, kid," he'd murmured, tilting her chin, starting compressions when her heart stuttered. His partner radioed for backup, but Caleb tuned it out, focused on the rhythm. Push, release, breathe. The scent of vomit and cheap perfume hung heavy, mixing with the ozone bite of the storm. By the time they loaded her into the rig, sirens wailing into the night, she'd gasped her first real breath, weak, but there. At the hospital, under the glare of surgical lights, Caleb stayed. Protocol said hand off and go, but something in her eyes, flickering open for a split second pleading, pulled him back. He held her hand as the docs pumped her full of naloxone, watching the color creep back into her cheeks. "You're gonna be okay," he'd said softly, more promise than fact. It was a vow born in the heat of the moment, the kind you make when the world narrows to one fragile life. But that night wasn't just about Rachel, as dawn bled grey through the ER windows. Another call came, a car wreck on the highway, mangled metal and screams. Caleb geared up again, adrenaline still humming, only to arrive at a scene that would haunt him forever. A young mother, trapped in the wreckage, her child silent in the back seat. He worked feverishly, cutting through twisted steel, the acrid smoke burning his lungs. But it wasn't enough. The monitors flatlined as the sun crested the horizon, and in that instant, something in Caleb shattered. He walked out of the hospital at shift's end and never went back, trading his badge for a leather cut and the open road. Now Noah's eyes searched his face, mirroring that long-ago desperation. "Rachel talks about you all the time, says you gave her a second chance. Our family's been through hell since. Dad left, Mum's sick, but Rachel's clean now. She's 17, working at the diner, taking care of me. She wanted to come herself, but she's scared you'll think she forgot." Caleb handed the photo back, his voice rough as gravel. "I didn't do it for thanks, kid, just the job." But it wasn't just a job, Noah pressed, tears spilling over now, carving tracks down his dust-streaked cheeks. "You promised her she'd make it, and she did, because of you." The words landed like a punch, stirring the embers of guilt Caleb had tried to smother. That promise, he'd whispered it in the dim ER light, a lifeline tossed into the dark. But the other one, the failure that followed, had driven him here, to this isolated workshop where engines didn't judge and roads led nowhere. Yet here was proof, one act of stubborn compassion rippling forward, touching lives he never knew. "Come inside," Caleb said finally, stepping aside. The door swung wider, inviting the night air in. Noah hesitated, then crossed the threshold, the photo clutched like a talisman. As Caleb closed the door against the wind, he felt the first stirrings of something long dormant, a quiet call to honor the vow he'd all but forgotten. The workshop's hum enveloped them, tools glinting like stars in the low light. Noah perched on a stool, recounting fragments of the years since. Rachel's rocky path to sobriety, the small victories in their fractured home. Caleb listened, leaning against the workbench, the scent of oil grounding him, but beneath the words, questions brewed. Why now? What shadows had followed this boy 20 miles into the desert? As the clock ticked past midnight, the pieces began to align, hinting at a deeper thread. Rachel wasn't just reaching out from gratitude. There was urgency in Noah's voice, a plea unspoken, and in that moment, Caleb realized his reclusive walls might not hold against the pull of a promise kept alive. The workshop's air hung heavy with the scent of aged leather and cooling metal, the single bulb overhead casting elongated shadows that twisted like unspoken regrets across the concrete floor. Caleb poured 2 mugs of black coffee from a dented percolator, the steam rising in lazy curls as he slid one across the workbench to Noah. The boy wrapped his small hands around it, the warmth chasing the chill from his fingers, but his gaze remained fixed on Caleb, searching, almost accusatory in its innocence. "She's in trouble," Noah blurted finally, his voice slicing through the quiet hum of the space heater. "Not like before. Not drugs. Something worse. The people from back then, they found her again." Caleb froze, the mug halfway to his lips, the bitter aroma sharpening his focus. The workshop, with its orderly chaos of scattered parts and half-finished repairs, suddenly felt too confined, the walls pressing in like the confines of memory. He set the coffee down with a soft thud, leaning forward on his elbows, the tattoos on his arms flexing like old scars under strain. "Start from the beginning, kid. What people?" Noah took a shaky sip, wincing at the heat. then set the mug aside. His words tumbled out in a rush, pieced together from fragments he'd overheard, from the fear that had etched lines too deep for a 10-year-old's face. Rachel had clawed her way back from the edge. Counseling sessions in a cramped community center, night shifts, flipping burgers at the roadside diner to keep the lights on for their ailing mother. But the shadows of her past lingered, whispers from the old crowd who dragged her into that warehouse nightmare years ago. Lately, they'd resurfaced. Shady figures in low-slung cars circling the diner's parking lot. Notes slipped under the apartment door, demanding repayment for favors long forgotten. "It's like they own her," Noah said, his voice dropping to a whisper, eyes darting to the door as if expecting it to burst open. "One of them cornered her after work last week. Said if she doesn't help them move something, stuff from the mill district, she'd lose everything. Me, Mom, all of it." Caleb's jaw tightened, a low rumble building in his chest like the idle of a V-twin engine. The mill district, Blackridge's forgotten underbelly, where rusted silos loomed like sentinels over abandoned lots, and the air still carried the ghost of illicit dealings. He'd seen it all during his paramedic days, overdoses masked as accidents, lives bartered in the dim glow of sodium lamps. But this? It smelled of coercion, the kind that twisted gratitude into chains. He thought of Rachel's fleeting glance that night in the ER, the silent trust she'd placed in his hands, a promise made in crisis, now echoing back as a call to arms. "Why me?" Caleb asked, though he already sensed the answer. His voice was steady, but inside, the gears of old instincts ground to life. Assess, stabilize, protect. "Because you kept your word once," Noah replied simply, pulling a folded note from his hoodie pocket. It was creased and stained, the handwriting scrawled in hasty block letters. "Tell the biker we know what he did. Rachel pays, or we take the kid." Caleb's blood ran cold, the paper crinkling under his grip. No names, no specifics, but the threat coiled like barbed wire. These weren't ghosts. They were opportunists, preying on vulnerabilities like vultures on roadkill. The desert night outside pressed against the windows, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant warnings. Caleb paced the length of the workshop, his boots echoing in measured steps, mind racing through scenarios he'd long suppressed. He could send the boy home, bolt the door, and let the road swallow his isolation again. But the photo on the workbench mocked that notion. Rachel's younger self, alive because he'd refused to let go. Honor wasn't a choice. It was the weld that held a man together when everything else cracked. "Get some rest," he said at last, grabbing a blanket from a nearby shelf and draping it over Noah's shoulders. The boy nodded, exhaustion etching his features as he curled up on the worn couch in the corner, the photo tucked under his arm like a shield. Caleb watched him for a moment, the rise and fall of small breaths steadying his own resolve. Then he stepped to the phone mounted on the wall, an old rotary relic that connected him to the sparse outside world. The line to the diner rang twice before a familiar voice answered, gruff, laced with fatigue. It was Marty, the owner, a grizzled veteran of too many shifts. "Turner, hell, it's been years. What's up? Rachel Jenkins work tonight?" Caleb kept it casual, but his free hand drummed against the workbench, betraying the tension. A pause, the clatter of plates in the background. "Yeah, she's here, closing up soon." "Why?" "Tell her a friend's coming by. Old friend. And Marty, keep an eye out. Trouble might be sniffing around." He hung up before questions could follow, grabbing his leather jacket from a hook. The material creaked as he shrugged it on, the weight familiar, grounding. Keys jangled in his pocket, the Harley waiting in the shadowed driveway like a loyal steed. Noah stirred as Caleb moved toward the door. "You'll bring her back? Safe?" Caleb met the boy's eyes, seeing the flicker of that same plea from years ago. "I promised her once. means I promise you now." The engine roared to life outside, a thunderous growl that shattered the night's hush. Headlights cutting twin beams through the dust. Caleb gunned it onto the cracked highway, the wind whipping past like a cleansing gale, carrying the scent of creosote and freedom. 20 miles stretched ahead, the blacktop unspooling under his tires, but for the first time in years, the road led somewhere, back to a life he'd touched, a vow demanding reckoning. The diner emerged from the haze like a beacon, its neon sign flickering, open in crimson glow against the pre-dawn gloom. Caleb killed the engine across the street, the sudden silence amplifying the distant hum of a semi on the interstate. He crossed the lot on foot, gravel crunching underfoot, senses alert to every shadow. Inside, the air was thick with the sizzle of cooling grease and the faint bitterness of spilled coffee. Rachel stood behind the counter, wiping it down with mechanical precision. Taller now, her frame filled out with the quiet strength of survival. Dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail, she looked up as the bell jingled, her movements halting, eyes widening in recognition. "You," she breathed, the rag dropping from her hand. Time folded in that instant, the years between them dissolving like mist under the sun. Caleb removed his helmet, running a hand through salt and pepper hair, his expression softening for the first time that night. "Noah found me, said you needed a second chance at thanks." Tears welled in her eyes, mirroring her brother's, but she blinked them back, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "He shouldn't have dragged you into this. It's my mess." They talked in hushed tones as she locked up, the diner's windows fogging slightly from their shared warmth. Rachel recounted the pressure building, the old associates leveraging her past against her future, demanding she turn a blind eye to their operations at the mill, or worse, participate. "They know about you," she admitted, voice trembling. "Heard stories, think you're some hero who can be bought off or scared away." Caleb's hand rested on the counter, steady as an anchor. "They don't know me, but I know what a promise means. You didn't forget it. Neither will I." As they stepped into the cooling air, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon in soft pinks, a low-slung car idled at the lot's edge, headlights off, engine purring like a predator. Rachel tensed beside him, but Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, the gesture simple, profound. In that touch, the fragments of their shared history began to mend, pulling him from his self-imposed exile into a fight for the family he'd unwittingly forged. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The first blush of dawn crept over the Blackridge horizon, turning the diner's parking lot into a canvas of muted oranges and greys. The gravel, still damp from overnight dew, that clung to Caleb's boots like reluctant memories. Rachel's breath came in shallow bursts beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm as they paused at the edge of the lot, the suspicious car's silhouette sharpening against the paling sky. Its engine idled low, a predatory purr that vibrated through the air, exhaust curling like smoke signals from a hidden fire. No lights, no movement, just the glint of tinted windows reflecting the neon's dying flicker. Caleb's hand tightened on her shoulder, a silent anchor in the swelling tension. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice a gravelly thread woven into the morning hush. The jacket's leather creaked as he shifted, muscles coiling from years of instinct rather than practice, eyes scanning the shadows where the lot met the overgrown weeds. Rachel nodded, her ponytail swaying, the faint scent of diner grease and vanilla shampoo mingling with the earthy promise of sunrise. She'd changed since that ER night, stronger lines in her face, a resolve etched from battles unseen, but the fear in her eyes echoed the girls he'd pulled from the brink. The car door creaked open slowly, spilling a figure onto the gravel. A man in his 30s, wiry build under a faded denim jacket, his face half shadowed by a baseball cap pulled low. He straightened, hands visible and empty, but the deliberate casualness set Caleb's nerves alight, like a fuse burning too slow before the blast. "Rachel!" the man called, his tone oily, laced with false familiarity. "We need to talk. Alone." She stiffened, stepping half behind Caleb, her fingers twisting the hem of her work apron. "I told you, I'm done. Leave us be." The man chuckled, a dry rasp that scraped the air. Taking a step forward, boots crunching deliberately. "Done? You owe, girl. That second chance, it came with strings. The boss don't forget." His gaze flicked to Caleb, assessing, dismissive. "And who's this? Your knight on a rusty bike? Tell him to ride off. This ain't his road." Caleb didn't flinch, his stance widening, the cool metal of his keys pressing into his palm like a talisman. Memories surged unbidden. The warehouse floor slick under his knees, Rachel's pulse threading back to life under his compressions. That promise hadn't been for show. It was the core of him, the part that refused to rust away in solitude. "She said her piece," he replied evenly, the words carrying the weight of desert wind. "You heard it. Now walk." The man's eyes narrowed, a smirk twisting his lips as he pulled a phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over the screen. "Big words for a ghost. We know your story, Turner. The wreck, the kid you couldn't save. Hero once, huh? Don't make this messy. Rachel helps with the drop tonight. Mill District, easy in and out, or the little brother pays the tab." Rachel's gasp cut sharp, her hand flying to her mouth. But Caleb felt the rage simmer low, not explosive, but steady as an engine at redline. The threat hung there, coiling tighter, the dawn light now illuminating the man's scarred knuckles, the faint bulge of something tucked in his waistband. No need for violence. This was a chessboard of shadows, moves made in whispers and warnings. Caleb stepped forward, closing the gap, his presence a wall of quiet authority. "You think threats buy loyalty? I've seen your kind, preying on the weak, twisting debts into nooses, but Rachel's free, and if you come near her, or the boy again, you'll learn what a real promise costs." The man hesitated, phone lowering slightly, the smirk faltering under Caleb's unyielding stare. The air thickened, charged with the unspoken standoff. The distant call of a waking bird piercing the tension. Then, from the diner's back door, Marty's voice boomed, gruff, authoritative, as he emerged wiping his hands on a towel, shotgun silhouette unmistakable in the half-light. "Everything all right out here?" It wasn't a question, it was backup, the kind born from small-town vigilance. The man glanced over, calculating, then spat into the gravel. "This ain't over." He backed toward the car, sliding in with a final glare, the engine revving to life in a throaty snarl. Tires spun briefly, kicking up dust that danced in the rising sun before the vehicle peeled away into the haze, taillights fading like retreating echoes. Rachel exhaled, trembling as the adrenaline ebbed, leaning into Caleb's side. "They won't stop. The mill. It's their hub now, smuggling whatever poisons the town. If I don't play along—" "You won't," Caleb cut in gently, guiding her toward his Harley parked across the street, the chrome gleaming like a vow renewed. The bike's seat was still warm from the ride, leather worn smooth from countless miles. He handed her a spare helmet from the saddlebag, its visor scratched but sturdy. "Not alone. We're getting you and Noah out of this. Back to the workshop first, safe ground, then we figure the rest." She mounted behind him, arms wrapping around his waist, the contact tentative at first, then firm, a bridge across the years. The engine thrummed to life beneath them, vibrations humming through their bones as Caleb eased onto the highway, the wind rushing past like a liberating sigh. Blackridge unfolded in the rear view, diner shrinking, the mill's distant silhouette a brooding sentinel on the flats. But ahead, the road curved toward possibility, the sun climbing to burn away the night's chill. Back at the workshop, Noah bolted upright from the couch as the door swung open, his eyes lighting with relief at the sight of Rachel. "Sis!" He launched into her arms, the photo fluttering to the floor, forgotten in the embrace. The air filled with their murmured reassurances, the scent of coffee lingering from hours before, now mingled with the fresh bite of morning air seeping through the cracks. Caleb watched from the workbench, pouring fresh mugs, the routine grounding him amid the swirl of revelations. As Rachel recounted the encounter in hushed tones, editing out the sharper edges for Noah's sake, Caleb's mind mapped the terrain ahead. These weren't random thugs, they were threads from the past, unraveling into the present, demanding he confront the guilt he'd chained to his isolation. The wreck that broke him. It echoed here in the fragility of this makeshift family, the chance to redeem what time had stolen. But deeper questions stirred. Who fed them the details? The note's precision hinted at betrayal closer to home, perhaps in the diner's orbit, or the community's frayed edges. Caleb pulled a chair over, joining their circle, his voice steady as he outlined a plan. Simple, unyielding. Fortify the workshop, reach out to old contacts from his paramedic days, those quiet allies in the shadows of service. "We face this together," he said, meeting Rachel's gaze. "That night in the ER, I promised you'd make it. This is the long haul of that promise." Noah nodded solemnly, clutching her hand, while Rachel's expression softened, tears tracing silent paths. The workshop, once a tomb of solitude, now pulsed with fragile unity. The clang of tools set aside, the low murmur of voices weaving bonds stronger than steel. Outside, the desert stirred awake, sagebrush whispering secrets to the wind, as Caleb felt the weight of honor settle, not as burden, but as purpose. The fight was just beginning, shadows lengthening toward noon, but in this circle, loyalty burned brighter than fear. The midday sun beat down on the workshop like a relentless forge, turning the air inside thick and shimmering with heat waves that danced off the metal surfaces. Caleb had rigged up extra fans from scavenged parts, their whirring blades stirring the scent of hot oil and sawdust into lazy eddies, but it did little to dispel the tension coiling in the space. Rachel sat cross-legged on the worn couch, Noah's head pillowed in her lap, his small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of uneasy sleep. She'd coaxed him into a nap with stories of better days, picnics by the dry riverbed, dreams of leaving Blackridge for places where the horizon promised more than dust. But her fingers trembled as they stroked his hair, the weight of unspoken fears etching deeper lines around her eyes. Caleb stood at the workbench, methodically cleaning his old service pistol, a relic from his paramedic training days, kept more for the comfort of routine than intent. The metal gleamed dully under his cloth, each pass deliberate, like tracing the veins of a promise long scarred over. He'd called in favors that morning, quiet words to trusted souls from his past. A retired sheriff buddy who owed him for pulling his nephew from a rollover crash. A nurse from the old ER who'd seen too much corruption in the town's undercurrents. Their responses were cautious. Hints of whispers about the mill district's renewed shadows, shipments slipping through under the guise of legitimate hauls, but enough to confirm the web tightening around Rachel. It wasn't random. It was targeted, preying on her hard-won stability, like weeds choking new growth. Rachel's voice broke the hum, soft but edged with resolve. "You don't have to do this, Caleb. You've already given us more than we deserve. That night, I was a ghost, drifting toward nothing. You saw me when no one else did." She shifted, careful not to wake Noah, her gaze lifting to meet his. The light caught the faint scar on her collarbone, a memento from the warehouse fall, and in that moment the years blurred, revealing the girl who'd clung to his words like a lifeline. He set the pistol down with a muted click, crossing to kneel beside the couch, the concrete cool against his knees. Up close, the air between them carried her warmth, a mix of soap and the faint floral trace of her shampoo, grounding him in the now. Deserve. Life doesn't tally like that. I made a vow in that ER, whispered it to keep the dark at bay. You'll make it. It wasn't just for you, kid. It was for the part of me that still believed in pulling people back. His voice roughened, the admission pulling at the buried ache of the wreck that followed, the child's silence that had silenced his own fire. But here, in this makeshift haven, redemption flickered, not as absolution, but as quiet amends. Noah stirred then, eyes fluttering open to the sound of their voices, confusion giving way to a sleepy smile at Rachel's touch. Is it over? The bad guy's gone. He sat up, rubbing his face, the oversized hoodie slipping off one shoulder to reveal a bruise fading on his arm. Nothing fresh, but a reminder of scrapes in a world too rough for small bones. Not yet, Caleb said honestly, ruffling the boy's hair with a gentleness that surprised even him. But we're building walls they can't climb, stronger ones than steel. He glanced at Rachel, a silent question passing between them. She nodded, steeling herself, and together they outlined the next steps. Fortify the workshop with locks and alarms jury-rigged from bike parts, arrange a safe drop for their mother at a relative's out of town, and scout the mill under cover of dusk. No charges, no badges, just the moral compass of those who'd chosen family over fracture. As the afternoon waned, the desert outside transformed under the shifting light, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for secrets. Caleb led them to the back lot, where his Harley stood sentinel beside a battered pickup he'd kept for errands. "First, we move your mum," he said, helping Noah into the cab while Rachel gathered a duffel from the diner's locker, clothes, meds, a few cherished photos. The engine coughed to life, a throaty rumble that vibrated through the seats, carrying the faint whiff of gasoline and sun-baked vinyl. They drove in convoy, Caleb's bike shadowing the truck, the highway unspooling like a vein through the arid flats, Joshua trees standing as silent witnesses. The aunt's place was a modest ranch on the outskirts, whitewashed walls baking under the sun, a porch swing creaking in the breeze. Their mother, frail but sharp-eyed, waited in a rocker, her face lighting at Rachel's approach. Hugs exchanged in hushed tones spoke volumes, the pull of blood, strained but unbroken, now bolstered by this unexpected alliance. "Take care of them," she whispered to Caleb as he loaded the last bag, her hand clasping his with surprising strength. "They're all I've got left." He nodded, the words landing like a charge to safeguard what fate had entrusted. Back on the road, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of amber and crimson, the air cooling to carry hints of creosote blooming in the twilight. At the workshop, they settled into an uneasy rhythm. Noah sketching crude maps of the mill on scrap paper, his tongue poking out in concentration. Rachel brewing tea from a hidden stash, the steam curling like fragile hopes. Caleb tuning the radio to static-laced frequencies, listening for echoes of trouble. But peace was fleeting. As full dark fell, headlights pierced the gloom. Not the predatory low-slung car, but a familiar pickup pulling up slow, dust swirling in its wake. Out stepped Lena, the nurse from his ER days, her scrubs traded for jeans and a windbreaker, greying hair tied back practical. She'd come unbidden, her face etched with the gravity of old confidences. "Heard through the grapevine," she said, stepping inside with a nod to the siblings. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing the circle tighter. Over mugs of cooling tea, she laid out the threads. The mill's operators weren't locals anymore, outsiders with ties to bigger shadows, using the district to funnel harms that poisoned communities from afar. "They're leaning on vulnerabilities," she explained, voice low, eyes flicking to Rachel. "But there's a ledger, old records from the clinic, proof of their hand in the overdoses, including yours. If we get it, it could expose them without a fight." Caleb absorbed it, the pieces slotting like gears in a well-oiled machine. Risky, delving into the heart of the beast, but laced with justice, the kind that healed rather than harmed. Rachel's hand found his under the table, a squeeze of alliance, while Noah watched wide-eyed, the weight of their unity forging something unbreakable. Outside, the night deepened, stars wheeling overhead like guardians, the desert wind whispering of trials ahead. In this forge of loyalty, Caleb felt the scars of his past yield, not to vengeance, but to the enduring power of a promise honored in silence. The hours stretched, plans solidifying into action. Lena would pull strings for access, Rachel the insider's eye, Caleb the steady hand to shield them all. As Noah dozed again, Rachel leaned close, her whisper carrying the scent of tea and resolve. "Thank you for seeing us whole." Caleb met her gaze, the workshop's hum a backdrop to the quiet vow renewing between them. Dawn would bring the mill's shadow closer, but here, in the heart of chosen kin, light held firm against the encroaching dark. If this chapter stirred something in you, hit that like button below. It helps these stories of quiet courage reach more hearts in need of hope. The velvet shroud of night had fully descended over Blackridge, the workshop's single bulb now a lone sentinel against the encroaching dark, its glow pooling on the concrete like spilled mercury. Caleb leaned against the workbench, the faint tang of gun oil lingering on his hands from earlier maintenance, his eyes tracing the faint cracks in the walls that mirrored the fractures in his resolve. Lena's words hung in the air, a blueprint etched in urgency. The ledger at the old clinic, tucked away in a forgotten file room, held the keys, dates, names, patterns of overdoses tied to the mill's operators. It wasn't a smoking gun, but a quiet indictment, the kind that could unravel their web without drawing blood. Rachel paced the narrow space between the couch and the tool racks, her footsteps soft but insistent, the hem of her jeans whispering against the floor. Noah had finally succumbed to sleep again, bundled in the blanket, his breaths even now, the day's fears chased away by exhaustion. But Rachel's energy crackled, a mix of gratitude and gnawing anxiety that sharpened her features in the dim light. "It's risky," she said, stopping to face Lena, who sat on a stool nursing her tea, the steam long gone cold. "The clinic's not abandoned, security's tight since the scandals. Guards, cameras, if they catch us." Lena met her gaze steadily, her hands folding around the mug like a talisman. The nurse's face, lined from years under fluorescent hospital lights, carried the quiet authority of someone who'd stitched wounds both seen and unseen. "I've got access, old credentials still hold for audits. But we need diversion. Caleb, you and the boy could draw eyes at the front while Rachel and I slip in the back." Her voice was measured, laced with the precision of old protocols, but beneath it pulsed the loyalty of shared history. She'd been there that stormy night, handing Caleb tools in the ER bay, witnessing the promise he'd made to the girl on the stretcher. Caleb nodded slowly, the plan settling like gravel under tires. Rough, but navigable. He thought of the wreck again, unbidden, the twisted metal yielding to his cutters, the child's form too still, the failure that had propelled him into isolation. This was different, no sirens, no protocols, but the core remained. Protect the fragile, honor the vow. "We move at midnight," he decided, his tone brooking no argument. "Moon's low, shadows deeper. Rachel, you know the mill routes. Any back ways to the clinic from there?" She hesitated, then traced a finger over Noah's crude map on the workbench. The pencil lines smudged from earlier revisions. "There's a service road off the old rail line, overgrown, but it skirts the district. We could park the truck there, approach on foot." Her touch lingered on the paper, a silent acknowledgement of the ground she'd once lost to shadows like these. The air between them thickened with unspoken bonds. The workshop's hum fading to a distant drone as their eyes met. Hers fierce with reclaimed fire, his steady with the weight of redemption. As the clock's hands crept toward the hour, they prepared in hushed efficiency. Lena, packing a slim satchel with gloves, a flashlight and lockpicks disguised as medical tools. Rachel slipping a hoodie over her frame, the fabric rustling like dry leaves. Caleb checking the Harley's chain one last time outside, the cool night air carrying the sharp bite of sage and distant rain. Noah stirred as they roused him gently, his eyes bleary but trusting. "I'm coming too," he asked, voice thick with sleep, clutching the photo like an amulet. "You're the lookout," Caleb replied, kneeling to his level, the gravel crunching under his boots. "Smart eyes like yours spot trouble before it moves. Stick with me." The boy nodded, a spark of purpose lighting his face, transforming fear into alliance. They loaded into the pickup, Caleb at the wheel, Noah beside him, Rachel and Lena in the back. The engine's low growl muffled as they eased onto the highway, headlights cutting through the ink-black expanse. The mill district loomed as they neared, its rusted silos' jagged teeth against the star-pricked sky, the air growing heavier with the metallic tang of decay and hidden dealings. Caleb killed the lights a half-mile out, navigating by memory, and the faint glow of the dashboard, the tires whispering over cracked earth. They parked in a thicket of mesquite, branches scraping the fenders like warnings, and proceeded on foot, the group moving as one shadow, boots silent on the dust, breath synchronized in the chill. The clinic squatted on the district's fringe, a squat brick building with boarded windows and a chain-link fence rattling in the breeze. Floodlights swept lazy arcs from a single guard post, the beam catching motes of dust like fleeting ghosts. Caleb and Noah peeled off toward the front, circling wide through the weeds, while Rachel and Lena vanished into the service alley, hearts pounding in unison. "Stay low," Caleb whispered to the boy, positioning him behind a derelict dumpster, its rusted sides cool and reassuring. Noah crouched, eyes wide, scanning the perimeter, the thrill of purpose edging out his fear. From their vantage, Caleb watched the guard's flashlight bob, a solitary rhythm against the night. Minutes stretched, tension coiling like a spring, until a distant clatter echoed from the back, tires screeching faintly, a feigned distraction from Lena's subtle handiwork. The guard perked, radio crackling to life as he lumbered toward the noise, leaving the entrance unguarded. Caleb's pulse thrummed, steady as an idling engine, as he signaled Noah to hold. This was the pivot, trust in the chosen family, the promise threading them together against the dark. Inside, Rachel's fingers trembled on the back door's lock, Lena's picks working with surgical grace, the click of tumblers like a heartbeat resuming. The corridor beyond was dim, air stale with disuse and the faint echo of old antiseptic, fluorescent strips flickering overhead. They moved swiftly, Rachel leading to the file room, a cramped vault of metal cabinets, dust motes swirling in their flashlight's beam. "Third row, under J for Jenkins," Lena murmured, pulling drawers with gloved hands, papers rasping like dry whispers. Rachel's breath hitched as she rifled through her own file first. Yellowed sheets detailing that night. Caleb's signature scrawled at the bottom like a seal on fate. Deeper in, the ledger emerged, a bound volume, innocuous amid the chaos, its pages crammed with entries, dates aligning with surges in overdoses, initials linking to mill shipments, a web of corruption laid bare. "This is it," Rachel breathed, tucking it into the satchel, the weight of truth heavy in her arms. But footsteps echoed from the hall, the guard, drawn back too soon. They bolted, hearts slamming, slipping through a side exit into the alley's embrace. Outside, the night held its breath, the wind picking up to mask their flight. Caleb spotted them first, emerging from the shadows with Noah in tow, the boy's face alight with relief. Heard the noise. Worked like a charm, Noah said, voice hushed but proud as they regrouped at the thicket. The pickup roared to life, gravel spitting under the tires as they fled the district, the clinic shrinking in the rear view like a vanquished spectre. Back at the workshop, doors barred and breaths evening. They spread the ledger on the workbench under the bulb's unforgiving light. Pages flipped in reverent silence, patterns emerging. Not just Rachel's story, but dozens like it, lives bartered, communities eroded by the mill's poison. Caleb traced a line with his finger, the ink faded but indelible, feeling the scars of his own losses align with this greater injustice. Rachel leaned against him, the satchel strap still slung over her shoulder, her voice a quiet anchor. We have proof now, real leverage. But they'll come harder. Know we've crossed them. Her hand found Noah's, pulling him close, the trio forming an unbreakable knot amid the tools and shadows. Lena nodded, packing the ledger away. I'll get it to safe hands. Prosecutors outside Blackridge, ones who don't bend. But tonight we rest. You've all earned that. She clasped Caleb's shoulder, a nod of old camaraderie, before slipping out into the night, her pickup fading down the drive. As the workshop quieted, Caleb poured water into glasses, the clink of ice a small mercy against the heat of the lamp. Noah yawned, curling up once more, while Rachel's eyes met Caleb's across the space, gratitude mingling with the fire of unfinished battles. That promise you made, it's carrying us now, she said softly, the words weaving through the air like threads of steel. He smiled faintly, the first true one in years, the weight of guilt easing just a fraction. Outside, the desert wind sighed, carrying hints of approaching storm, but within these walls, loyalty stood firm, a family forged in crisis, ready for the reckoning dawn would bring. The road ahead twisted with peril, shadows hungry for retribution, yet in this circle, honor burned eternal. A light no darkness could extinguish. The first light of dawn filtered through the workshop's grimy windows, casting elongated fingers across the workbench where the ledger lay like a captured secret, its leather cover scarred and unassuming. Caleb hadn't slept, his body slumped in a chair with arms crossed over his chest, the faint ache in his neck a reminder of vigilance earned through the night. The air still carried the musty residue of their midnight raid, dust from the clinic files mingling with the ever-present bite of engine grease. But now a new undercurrent stirred, the sharp ozone tang of an approaching storm, thunder rumbling low in the distance like a warning growl. Rachel stirred on the couch, Noah tucked against her side, his small form rising with a yawn that broke the hush. She met Caleb's gaze across the room, her eyes shadowed but clear, the weight of the ledger pulling them into unspoken alignment. We did it, she whispered, as if voicing it might summon the shadows back, but the words hung fragile. For the proof in their hands was a spark that could ignite fury from those who'd guarded it in the dark. Caleb rose slowly, joints protesting the night's toll, and poured water from a pitcher into dented mugs, the liquid glugging softly. He handed one to Rachel, his fingers brushing hers in a gesture that spoke of bridges rebuilt. Lena's got it now, on her way to folks who'll make it count, but they're not done, not until they know we've got teeth. His voice was rough, honed by years of solitude, yet laced with the steady cadence of a man reclaiming his purpose. The promise from that ER night pulsed beneath it all, a vein of honor threading through the chaos, binding this unlikely kin. Noah rubbed his eyes, sitting up with the photo clutched in his fist, the image of young Caleb and Rachel, now a talisman against the unknown. What if they come here, like that guy at the diner? His question pierced the air, small but pointed, drawing them closer in shared resolve. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose pane in the door, sagebrush scraping against the siding like impatient claws. They ate a sparse breakfast, canned peaches and stale crackers from Caleb's stores, the sweetness cloying against the tension, forks scraping tin plates in rhythmic pauses, plans reformed over the meal. Stay put until Lena's call confirmed the ledger's safe passage, then relocate to a neutral ground. A remote cabin Caleb knew from old riding trails, tucked in the canyons where cell signals faded and pursuit stalled. No heroics, just survival woven with justice, the moral weight of exposure their shield. But the morning shattered before the sun crested fully. Tires crunched on the gravel drive, a low-slung sedan, not the earlier threat but sleeker, anonymous, pulling up with deliberate slowness. Caleb was at the window in an instant, peering through the blinds, his hand instinctively drifting to the pistol holstered at his belt. Two figures emerged, the wiry man from the diner, flanked by a broader companion, both in nondescript jackets that hid bulges of intent. They didn't approach the door. Instead, they lingered by the car, voices murmuring, eyes scanning the workshop like predators circling a den. Rachel pulled Noah behind the workbench, her arm a protective barrier, breath hitching as she whispered, "They've found us." "How?" The boy's face paled, but he didn't cry, resolve hardening his features, a mirror of the sister who'd fought her way back from the abyss. Caleb signaled silence, slipping to the side door with the grace of shadowed experience, the leather of his jacket whispering against the frame. He circled wide through the back lot, using the Harley's bulk for cover, the desert floor cool and yielding under his boots. The air hummed with impending rain, heavy clouds swallowing the light, turning the scene to muted greys. Circling to their flank, he overheard fragments. The nurse squealed. "Get the girl, make an example." Betrayal stung sharp. The grapevine had twisted, Lena perhaps tailed, or a deeper leak from the clinic's fringes. He emerged from the mesquite thicket like a spectre, boots silent until the last step, his presence announced by the click of the pistol's safety. "Looking for something?" Caleb's voice cut through, even and unyielding, the barrel leveled low but unmistakable. The men spun, hands rising halfway, surprise etching their faces, the wiry one's smirk replaced by a snarl. "Turner," the leader spat, eyes flicking to the workshop door. "Hand her over. The ledger too. Boss says it's a clean slate if you walk away." His companion shifted, muscles tensing, but Caleb's stare held them, a wall of quiet authority forged from losses that no threat could breach. "Clean slate. That's your poison talking." Caleb stepped closer, the wind tugging at his collar, carrying the faint metallic scent of the men's fear sweat. "Rachel's paid enough. You prey on the broken, twist second chances into chains. But that ends now. Walk, or the truth walks first, to every corner of this county." The broader man lunged, a desperate grab for leverage, but Caleb sidestepped. The pistol's grip firm as he drove an elbow into the man's gut, not to maim, but to fold him double, gasping on the gravel. The wiry one hesitated, phone in hand, thumb poised to call reinforcements, but the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Lena's doing, her network alerting the clean badges beyond Blackridge's corrupt veil. The standoff fractured. They scrambled back to the car, engine roaring to life in a spray of dust, tires screaming as they fled into the storm's gathering maw. Caleb holstered the weapon, chest heaving, not from exertion but release, as Rachel and Noah burst from the door, faces alight with a mix of terror and triumph. She rushed to him, arms enveloping in a fierce hug, Noah clinging to her leg, the photo fluttering free to land at Caleb's feet. Rain began to patter, soft at first, washing the gravel clean, the scent of wet earth rising like renewal. "You're okay," Rachel murmured into his shoulder, pulling back to search his face, tears mingling with the first drops. "They came for us, but you stood." He nodded, retrieving the photo, tucking it into her hand. "We stood. All of us." The sirens grew louder, lights flashing in the distance, not as foes but harbingers of accountability. the ledger's ripples breaking the surface. As lawmen, outsiders with unbent spines, arrived to secure the scene, statements taken under the workshop's overhang, the storm unleashed in earnest, sheets of rain drumming the roof like applause. Caleb watched the sedan's taillights vanish into the haze, the immediate threat scattered, but knowing the web's heart still pulsed. Inside, as they warmed by the space heater, mugs of reheated coffee steaming, Noah sketched the encounter on fresh paper. Heroes in simple lines, no monsters, just shadows yielding to light. Rachel leaned against Caleb, her head on his shoulder, the family's circle unbroken. That promise. It saved more than me. It's saving us now. Her words wove through the rain's symphony, a testament to loyalty's quiet power, redemption unfolding not in glory, but in the steadfast hold of honor against the gale. The afternoon blurred into a haze of interviews and precautions, the workshop a temporary fortress under watchful eyes. But as evening fell, the storm easing to a drizzle that beaded on the windows like scattered diamonds, Caleb felt the pull of the road ahead. Not escape, but pursuit of full closure. The ledger had cracked the door. Now they would push it wide, ensuring no tendrils reached back to ensnare the innocent. In this chosen kin, forged from a single act of compassion, the legacy of sacrifice burned bright, a beacon through the lingering dark. The rain had tapered to a fine mist by the time the last of the investigators packed away their notebooks, their unmarked cruisers pulling away from the workshop with the crunch of wet gravel fading into the evening hush. Caleb stood on the porch, arms crossed over his damp jacket, watching the taillights dissolve into the storm-washed horizon. The air hung heavy with the scent of petrichor and wet sage, the desert floor glistening under the emerging stars like a canvas scrubbed clean. Blackridge felt smaller now, its shadows pierced by the ledger's revelations, but the victory was tentative. A thread pulled, not the whole tapestry unraveled. Inside, the workshop's warmth enveloped them like a hard-won embrace. Rachel sat at the workbench, Noah perched on a stool beside her, his small hands tracing the edges of the photo as if committing it to memory. The space heater hummed softly, chasing the chill from their bones, while a pot of soup simmered on the hot plate. Caleb's makeshift offering, chunks of vegetables and canned broth bubbling with the faint spice of cumin. Lena had slipped away earlier, her final words a quiet assurance. The ledger was en route to a federal contact, one who'd dismantled the mill's network from the roots, exposing the corruption that had festered unchecked. Rachel looked up as Caleb stepped back in, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing out the night's damp breath. Her eyes, still rimmed red from the day's strain, softened at his approach. They said it'll take time. Investigations, arrests, but it's real. No more running. She reached for Noah's hand, squeezing it, the boy's fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of quiet solidarity. The bruise on his arm had faded to a shadow, but the resilience in his gaze shone brighter, forged in the fire of their unity. Caleb nodded, pulling up a chair across from them, the wood creaking under his weight. Exhaustion tugged at him, but it was the good kind, the ache of purpose reclaimed after years adrift. He ladled soup into bowls, the steam rising in fragrant curls that carried hints of earth and comfort, and they ate in companionable silence at first, spoons clinking against ceramic like punctuation to the unspoken. The workshop, once a monument to isolation, now pulsed with life, tools set aside, the Harley in the corner a silent witness to roads yet to be travelled together. Noah broke the quiet, his voice tentative but clear. "Does this mean we can stay, like a family?" He glanced between them, the photo laid flat on the bench, Caleb's younger face staring back with the fierce determination of that ER night. Rachel's breath caught, her free hand hovering near Caleb's arm, not quite touching. The question hung there, vulnerable as the boy himself, stirring the embers of Caleb's buried longings. He'd lost his own blood ties to the road's call long ago, parents gone to illness, no siblings to anchor him. But this was the family chosen in crisis, woven from a promise whispered in desperation. "Yeah, kid," Caleb said finally, his voice rough but warm, like gravel smoothed by rain. "If you'll have me, workshop's got room, bunk for you, shifts at the diner for your sis. We'll build from here." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, spilling over as she leaned forward, her hand finally finding his. The contact was electric, a circuit completing after years of static. "You've saved me twice now," she murmured. The words laced with the depth of her journey, from the warehouse's cold grip to this moment of fragile hope. "That night, I heard you. You'll make it." It echoed through every relapse, every doubt. And now, look at us. Caleb covered her hand with his, calluses rough against her skin, the tattoos on his forearm catching the light like badges of battles endured. Memories flooded him unbidden, the ER's sterile glare, Rachel's pulse steadying under his care, the wreck's chaos, the silence that followed, driving him to this desert exile. Guilt had been his constant companion, a chain he'd forged from failure, but here it cracked, yielding to the ripple of one compassionate act that had bloomed into salvation for this fractured kin. Redemption wasn't a grand absolution, it was this, honoring the vow in the everyday, standing firm when shadows pressed. Outside, thunder rumbled anew, distant and rolling, but the storm's fury had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. They talked late into the night, voices weaving plans and dreams, Noah's sketches evolving into blueprints for a garden behind the workshop. Rachel's resolve turning toward community college under the diner's neon glow. Caleb shared fragments of his paramedic past, not the losses, but the lives touched, the quiet honors that had sustained him before the break. Laughter crept in, tentative at first, then fuller, chasing the last vestiges of fear. As midnight neared, Noah dozed off against Rachel's shoulder, his breaths even, the photo tucked into his pocket like a promise kept. Caleb walked her to the door when she rose to stretch, the cool air seeping in with the scent of rain-soaked earth. "Thank you," she said simply, turning to face him, the porch light haloing her like a figure from one of his road-worn reveries, "for seeing the worth in us when we couldn't." He pulled her into a hug, brief but profound, the leather of his jacket creaking against her hoodie. "Family's not born, it's chosen, and I've got yours." She nodded, stepping back with a smile that lit the shadows, before slipping into the night toward the temporary quarters Lena had arranged nearby, a safe house until the dust settled. Alone again, but not truly, Caleb locked the door and returned to the workbench. The ledger's absence a void, filled by possibility. The workshop hummed around him, tools glinting like allies, the Harley waiting for dawn rides that would now carry more than solitude. The road stretched ahead, twists of justice still unfolding, the mill's operators facing their reckoning, Blackridge healing from its hidden wounds, but in his chest the old guilt eased, replaced by the steady thrum of purpose, a legacy of sacrifice, loyalty's quiet fire burning against cynicism's chill. As the first bird stirred with the pre-dawn grey, Caleb felt the weight lift fully, the promise from that stormy night complete. Not in erasure of scars, but in their transformation into strength. He was no longer the reclusive biker haunted by what-ifs. He was the anchor, the chosen guardian, honoring the moral compass that had guided him through the dark. The desert wind whispered approval through the cracks, carrying the faint tang of gasoline and new beginnings as the sun crested, gilding the horizon in gold. Thank you for joining this journey of quiet courage and unbreakable promises. If these stories of redemption touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more tales of honor and family waiting just for you.